Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, episode 35. On this week's episode, I wanted to talk about press freedom, and the reason why this topic came up to me is because I noticed my friend had posted an article from the Guardian, which is I believe it's based in London, a British newspaper. I don't know how many. Obviously, I would say the majority of my listeners have probably heard of the newspaper. And in it, they wrote an article that I found very fascinating. Apparently, Jean Claude Juncker, president of the European Union and Luxembourgian, criticized the British press, saying their press was too free almost. Well, he didn't say too free, but he said they go after politicians with impunity and politicians need more human rights. And I find this very interesting because I don't know if many people remember, but our president here in America, President Trump, has also said some things like, I'm going to go after some of these people in the press, and he made it very public calling CNN fake news, which that's I mean, every president can do stuff like that, but he's literally said he's going to sue people for slander sometimes and things like that. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of talk about this week attitudes towards freedom of the press and how that makes us all feel. So I guess I'm gonna mainly in this episode talk about what I've observed from places I've listened to the most. I'm going to talk about mainly radio and print media because I feel like that is the most interesting press. I will talk a bit about channels too. I mean, but I'm probably not going to spend much time on American cable news because I find it extremely untrustworthy and just plain ludicrous in all of them. I don't want people to think that I'm singling out anything from a right or left wing perspective when I make that statement. I find all of it to be, frankly, quite insane and very untrustworthy, largely. So, anyway, yeah, so I'm going to talk about mainly the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and South Africa, where I've listened to the most talk radio and read the most print media from. Anyway, so press freedom, when we talk about this concept of press freedom, I think all of us assume when we're here in the Western world that uh, we kind of have this assumption that the media can all say virtually anything, that's what freedom of speech means. And I think that I don't mean to be super prideful in Americanism here. I'm sure I'll get comments and whatever. But I think a lot of people think that because of the American First Amendment to the Constitution, that that's what it implies, and in theory it implies that here in America, but a lot of people don't understand that it doesn't necessarily imply that in Canada or the United Kingdom or Germany or France or, obviously somewhere like South Africa or North Korea or, but yes, to a large degree, we like to operate under the assumption that journalists have the ability to investigate something, write about it, and report it to the public, whether or not it's popular with the government, popular with corporation, or popular with whatever. And in an ideal world, yes, anybody can say anything, you know. But there has been proven time and again, not just in England, not just in Canada, not just in South Africa, not just, not obviously not in North Korea or China or somewhere, but it's been proven even in the United States that there are limitations on that, whether they be societal or even imposed by the court system or our government. Press outlets like the National Enquirer, which is known for being quite an extreme tabloid, they have been sued for slander before. Or there was that really famous incident with Hulk Hogan and Gawker where they released a sex tape that he was in that was a private matter, and they got sued for a whole bunch of money. So there are limitations, right? Journalists don't have full impunity to report anything. That being said, as in general, I have noticed that it does appear to me, having read stuff, in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, South Africa, Germany, and France too. But having read that, I do think in the United States, you get a bit more latitude, per se. And the consequences of that are, well, they're good and bad. A lot of people want to just make carte blanche statements like, oh, the American press is crazy and therefore it's horrible, or, oh, the converse argument is I hear people all the time say the press in the United Kingdom isn't free. Nobody believes in free speech there because they have banned some of our talk show hosts from America, or stuff like that. But there's good and bad to a lot of things. So I'm going to kind of break down some of these outlets and talk about what I mean with this. Okay, so obviously the Guardian, and Juncker, when he says this, he's not just saying this out of thin air. Okay, I don't want people to get the impression that like Juncker just thought this up one day and said it. Okay, because while it did seem like he just came out and said that because of this whole Brexit scenario, and he's not happy with, I'm sure he's not happy with outlets like Leading Britain's Conversation or Express or The Independent or even the Daily Mail, where Peter Hitchens writes in a whole bunch, saying stuff that's anti the European Union 24/7, giving Nigel Farage airplay and stuff like that. I'm sure he's not happy with that. But that being said, England, there was a huge scandal with I think it was a Guardian reporters or some reporters who, that big cell phone controversy where they had gotten these personal private numbers and had gone way, way too hard after, these politicians. And this was like 5 or 6 years ago, and it ended up in court, and these people got fined a huge amount of money, and it's a big scandal. And Rupert Murdoch, they were saying, because he owns the majority of these news outlets, they're saying, what kind of trash are you allowing? This is too far, right? And it sucks, right? We really want to believe that. Okay, I think the biggest problem is we want to believe that journalists, when they're trying to get a scoop, when they're trying to report on something, I think most people in the Western world, right wing, left wing, center, whatever, want to believe that if not all journalists are going to behave this way, at least there's some standard or somewhere where there's journalists who are behaving with integrity and are only trying to report. They're only trying to report the real news. They're only trying to find the real issues in society and report on them and bring them to the light to everybody else. The problem is in my opinion, I find that to be a rarity, an extreme rarity, like such an extreme rarity that I don't even feel comfortable saying any one particular outlet is my go-to outlet. Okay, because I've read everything across the gamut. I can go through and list all the different places I read things from, but it's such a rarity. I think what happens often is we allow our ideological bias to make us think that the reporters who report what I like are the ones who are the gold standard, which is not true. Everybody has their biases. So that being said, everybody being imperfect doesn't mean we should clamp down on the press necessarily, does it? Because if we were to come in here and say, you can't say this or that, we need this level of standard before it could be printed, who's going to make up that line? Well, it would have to be government, right? And the problem with that is journalism is the traditional outlet to be a bounce and check on government. So you don't want the government checking up on journalists, right? So it's a sticky, thorny issue. So I'll get back to why I see that. So when we look at, I'll start off with talking about the United States, and then I'll move into other countries because I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for no matter what I say here. But anyway, in the United States, what really sets us apart to me, as opposed to anywhere else, is A, we got these crazy cable news outlets I'm not even going to talk about, but B, um, I would say we don't have much of what people assume is okay. We do have a standard bearer. Okay, the problem we have is everywhere else in the world, in my opinion, there is some. We have government run news too. PBS reports news, so does NPR. But people don't take our government news as seriously as other people take government news. Or C-SPAN, I guess, is technically considered government news too. But we have a larger separation there. Granted, everyone else does too, but we have a much larger separation there. And that's not to say the thing. NPR and PBS aren't exclusively government news. A lot of their money does actually come from people just flat out donating money. Okay, but they are the closest thing we have to resembling government news. And the reason why that sets us so far apart, in my opinion, is because there's not a big tradition on standards and press practices. It's almost like American journalism is it's a wild jungle sometimes. And sometimes it's great, because, lots of times I find a lot of the new upstart outlets in America will be people reporting things that they weren't allowed to report where they were from. Like when Russia Today came in here, and started up a channel and stuff, they report some things here that they probably couldn't get away with in Russia. Or Al Jazeera reports a lot of stuff here I'm not sure they could get away with in the Arab region. And it's good in some respects, that we have such an open forum that it is kind of like a wild jungle. But it's also so horrible because it just feels like the most extreme voices are the only things people remember. Like, people don't remember a somewhat moderate voice coming on there and talking all the time. They just remember Alex Jones screaming his head off, or Rachel Maddow at MSNBC. I said I wasn't going to mention these cable outlets. Anyway, so it's good and bad. And for me, as an American growing up, seeing this circus 24/7, I don't know, I do get very fatigued because all my friends do is just post stuff they like from their side that supports what they say, and they say these people are the real reporters. And it's like, yeah, I would rather see somebody, and I find it more exciting when I see a local outlet like the Chicago Tribune, who's in a very liberal town and has posted liberal things before in their paper, come in hard on the Democratic candidate for governor for not appearing at their debate. Like, that's cool. That's exciting when a news outlet does something that's against what I was expecting. That's really exciting for me. And unfortunately, I just don't see that very much in American press. Now, I want to move slowly into talking about the press in Britain, because that is something I find interesting. So while I want to take a moment to say, people did used to kind of consider the New York Times and the Washington Post to be sort of standard bearers for what journalism was supposed to look like in the United States because of some of the stuff they used to break earlier. And the New York Times, I think, almost one of the oldest, or if not the oldest. But the problem is they went away from that. Like, they got very partisan, and not even just that they got partisan, because everybody gets partisan. It's ridiculous to claim there's not any kind of partisanism in your newspaper, your news outlet. But they were just proven so false in the past 5 years that they have a lot to do to get respect back. It's going to take a long time for them to earn the public respect back. So anyway, I want to move on now and talk about the United Kingdom. And we're going to move into talking about, so there we have the BBC, who is the most infamous government-run broadcasting news, right? But the thing people don't understand about the BBC is they are independent, though. They are allowed to criticize the government. They have a long history of being their own thing. Now, they do side with the government a lot, but they have a long history of doing things. I mean, it's fascinating. It's fascinating they become such a strong standard bearer. And I think the thing that people, despite all the criticism they receive, and most of it is fair, they have a way of just they have a way of turning course, or a way of at least allowing other views in. They do. It seems like even like people were giving them crap over the Brexit, and I saw they were pretty hard on a lot of the Brexiteers, but they still aired these people. Like they don't have they don't do like they don't not air these people. You know, they don't like totally dismember. I don't know how to describe it. They don't totally like show them in just complete negative light. Like they're not running around like the ABC was, you know, right around the election with this whole Russia thing, with the whole Russia Regdar election thing, and showing this big, mad, evil Putin on the. They don't do that generally very often at the BBC. They try to refrain from that kind of stuff, and that is why when I recently did a poll in an international group about what was the most trusted news source. I think that's why the BBC became number one, is because most of the time you don't feel like they're participating in what we would call extreme journalism, or I don't know, you know, they're not doing it just for clicks. You know, they just seem to be more laid back and reserved. That all being said, there's a reason why they're not the only press outlet in England. You know, because a lot of people who are left leaning, like The Guardian, and some of their stuff that I've read has been good reporting. A lot of it hasn't been. I particularly think they do a bad job of covering American politics. I think they feel like they need to do it so they get more money or viewers or whatever, but it seems like they just have a horrible grip on American politics, and they're constantly getting reporting stuff incorrectly. And then, you know, I found out about Express, who seems to do some right wing stuff, and of course LBC seems to be very pro Farage and Euroscepticism and all this stuff. And you know, that to me is they're almost getting to Fox News level of being kind of slanted. You know, and then um, I also, you know, think it's interesting that Daily Mail still employs Peter Hitchens. You know, but yeah, so and you know, everybody remembers, of course, the big scene on Channel 4 with Kathy Newman, and how much her whole team went to bat for her when she appeared to get pretty smashed in this interview of Jordan Peterson. And I want to say, oh no, I can't respect that outlet after that happened, but they also employed Louis Theroux, and well, Louis Theroux also did a lot more with the BBC too, but they did employ him for a bit, and they employed my favorite documentarian, Nick Broomfield, for a long time. And you know, so I want to say I don't have much respect for them, but they've also done things that I've liked too. So I the British press, I think, is a little bit more well-rounded than the American press, but I also think that means they don't take as many risks as they could. You know, so it's a catch-22. But I do think that both the British press and the American press, it seems like they are more free than anywhere else I've observed. They, you know, you definitely feel like they don't fear for the government shutting them down tomorrow, or you know, having much issue. It definitely seems like they get more latitude. Whether now that doesn't mean they use it correctly, you know, it just means they have more latitude, you know, which is fine. You know, it's good. It's a good thing. I really do find it fascinating to see all this different stuff out of the British press or the American press. Now I want to slowly, I'll just close up here real quick, talking about Canadian and South African press. So I listened to for a while about this. Listened to this AM station out of South Africa called Cape Talk, out of Cape Town, because it was on evening commute when it was morning where I was working in my office. So it's very interesting, and I've read a few of their papers in South Africa, and it's so weird because they are they seem like a largely free, established news outlet, and they seem to not have much trouble. Eyewitness News is the other. They seem to be able to report on whatever they want, but their government is, quite intense and just seems to do whatever laws it wants. I guess the government just doesn't have the power to shut them down, which is cool. It's interesting, but it is also I do worry for them. I worry for their long term future. I worry one day they're just going to get shut down or it's going to be something crazy happening in the studio. But yeah, they still seem free to say whatever they want. It just doesn't seem to have much impact, which that's weird too. That's something else I see. It seems like in the American extreme press or the British press, what people say has impact. It connects with the voters sometimes. Sometimes minds are changed. Often they are. But it seems like when I was listening and reading this stuff from the South African press, it seems like it has virtually no effect on the voters, or at least it does in Cape Town and maybe Johannesburg and some other places, but not over the large amount of voters. And that to me is just very, very odd. Like their Cape Talk or somebody will be reporting about this rampant corruption or the government's inability to solve XYZ things, and then the election will roll around and they'll keep voting for this same government under Zuma, and I'm not just trying to pin this on Zuma. All these corrupt officials. It seems like these corrupt officials constantly survive in South Africa. Not to say corrupt officials don't survive in America or England, but it does catch up to you eventually. Usually, sometimes it doesn't, but usually it does. And you just feel like they'll be hounded by the press until eventually they get caught up. It just doesn't seem that way in South Africa. It's very strange. It's like press has no effect on people. I can't explain it. Now, I wanted to close with talking about Canada because Canada seems like such a weird animal to me. And maybe some people can come in and clean this up a bit for me. I have some Canadians in my audience. But I want to talk about this particular scandal because it was so interesting how it was reported to me. So, the CBC, the biggest broadcaster in Canada, government run, does news. They had a very infamous figure on there named Gian Comishi, and he was accused of sexual assault. And of course, they fired him before the trial happened. And then after the trial happened, he was eventually, eventually found innocent. And you know, and I mean, I think he's still kind of like had some odd sexual quirks, possibly. But the thing that got me about that was, so you're the CBC, you're the biggest broadcaster in Canada. You didn't look into this more before you like had your people almost railroading on your former employee. It's very strange. And then, of course, in lieu of that, during this time, this place called the Rebel Media tried to spring up as an alternative that was going to be like this libertarian / conservative alternative, and it turned out to be such a big crap show that it was almost worse than the CBC, because they had Lauren Southern on there, and apparently this one reporter that used to work for them called Laura Loomer was just nuts and making the whole situation uncomfortable for everybody. And the person in charge of the company was defrauding people of money and doing all kinds of. It was just weird. It was like because there is a very established libertarian news outlet in America called Reason, and even people from like the Democratic and Republican parties say it's a very established outlet. It doesn't, again they get some stuff wrong too every once in a while, but they're not considered just hack journalism or just but man, the Rebel Media is this total crap show. That's all I can describe it. And the reason why I say this is because the the Canadian press seems to me like it's just too is like lazy journalism or something. I don't know. Maybe somebody can show me some better outlets from Canada, but I've read 3 or 4, and it seems like once they've just decided that something is a certain way, nobody else reports, and they just roll with constant opinion pieces. Not to say that didn't happen in America during 2016, but there were still some other outlets. In America, there's always other outlets. In England, there's always other outlets. But in Canada, it was like with this Ghomeshi thing, it was just like everybody was like he was guilty. The only way I actually found out that there was possibly going to be some evidence in the trial that would acquit him until he was actually acquitted. Then, of course, all the outlets reported that he was acquitted. Well, the only way I found that out was from these small underground YouTubers. One of them happened to be a professor at the University of Toronto too, and just like Jordan Peterson, some other professor somewhere. Well, it was in Toronto, somewhere else. But that's the only way I was able to find out. I mean, that's insane, man. Like in America, if you don't like what WAPO is reporting, you can go read Breitbart, or you can go read, the American Conservative or the Federalist or whatever. My mind's blown. So yeah. So I want to wrap this up by saying, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is here. I like the idea of having freedom of the press and all these different outlets and sources, but I also see how awful it gets in practice. Because today, basically, we have ended up in the same cycle we were in during the Jackson Henry Clay days, where you just have a bunch of papers saying pick your side in this gigantic struggle in America, just writing warring columns on each other, and it makes it very hard for somebody who's trying to be an open-minded person like me, because you feel like everybody's got an angle that they're trying to push towards you. You just want to listen. You just want some straight news. Anyway, so thanks for listening. I guess what I also have to say is just try and find more local news. The more local it is, generally the better it is, but it's still rough sometimes. Anyway, thanks for listening. See y'all.